Now, more on the TVPA. The TVPA is the first comprehensive law to address human trafficking issues on three fronts: prosecution, prevention, and also the other one is protection. Yeah. And I think it has been reauthorized in 2003 and 2005 with more enhancement and expansions, namely RICO status and racketeering offenses, and more resources for crime prevention and also for victims of trafficking. Now, with regard to Vietnam, despite all the expansion and enhancements, the situation there seems got to the point that yesterday or the day before you say something, you mentioned the possibility of dropping Vietnam from tier 2 to tier 3. Why so, and how?
Well, again, we wrote very modest, but they're like a floor of minimally acceptable behavior when it comes to human trafficking, whether it be sex trafficking or labor trafficking. We call them the minimum standards. Countries are then very carefully looked at through that backdrop to see whether or not they're living up to it. And we do it to our own country. The United States is also held to account, not in the TIP report, but in a report that comes from the Attorney General's office. Vietnam, regrettably, has failed to meet those minimum standards, especially in the area of labor trafficking. When we wrote the law, remember, I'm the prime sponsor of it, we made sex trafficking and labor trafficking equal. Even though there's an emphasis on sex trafficking because it is the equivalent of rape, it's a horrific, barbaric mistreatment of women, mostly women and young children.
Men too.
And more men, especially young boys in some countries. But with labor trafficking, the law is equally applicable. You could get up to life imprisonment for recruiting, harboring, transporting, or endgame exploitation of a person through trafficking. And yet there's been less emphasis given on the labor trafficking, and that's where Vietnam, regrettably, has flourished. The government has permitted, facilitated huge numbers of people through these brokerages and these broker agreements, whereby once they get to other countries, they are horrifically abused. We're not talking about not paying them enough. Their passports are taken, their documents, and very often they're in situations of slave-like conditions. And on that score, the TIP report itself makes it very clear that there were no prosecutions on labor trafficking in the reporting period, not one. And there's upwards of 500,000 people abroad, a percentage of which have been trafficked in labor areas.
Yeah, back to Dr. Tang. If Vietnam is dropped to tier 3, sanctions shall apply, right? And in your report, the Vietnam Study Group, your assessment is that Hanoi does not fully comply with minimum standards, nor demonstrate any willingness or interest or commitments to make additional steps, while the number of victims is significantly increasing. So now, given Hanoi attitude, especially in your landmark case in Jordan, and their past achievements in punishing crimes often committed by state-affiliated companies, what are the other sanctions you feel that need to be there in order to make job is better?
First of all, before talking about sanctioning Vietnam, our State Department report must first of all rank them in tier 3. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case with the latest report. It's very regrettable. I do believe that Vietnam belongs in tier 3 based on the evidence that we have obtained so far. That has indicated that the Vietnamese government, at least some very high-ranking officials, have been part of the trafficking syndicate. And that the Vietnamese government is more interested in protecting the interests of the traffickers than in defending the victims and protecting the victims. I do propose that the State Department focuses on a number of high-profile cases that we have provided to them over the years and get to the bottom of that. The test, use that as a litmus test to see whether Vietnam truly has the resolve and determination and the good faith to fight human trafficking or not. For instance, in the case of about 250 Vietnamese victims, including some 30 victims from China as well, in the American Samoa case. That is, I think that was the first case prosecuted under your law, right, the TVPA Act. The High Court of American Samoa ruled that Vietnam must pay in compensation $3.5 million to these workers, and yet to this day nothing has been done to collect that money. In the Jordan case, for instance, we just received a letter from Vietnam, several petitions from Vietnam, reporting that after these 156 workers, all women, returned to Vietnam, they are now being demanded by the brokers to pay $800 in expenses for having brought them home. So that is a situation that we are very concerned about.
Thank you for this. Now back to Chris. On Wednesday, when the State Department released the 2008 TIP report, and you made a statement, let me quote you. The 8th TIP contains compelling proof that American leadership in combating modern-day slavery is making an enormous difference here and around the world, and gives hope to those whose lives have been shattered by these horrific crimes. Yet you seem to be critical of serious mission. Tell me about the missions.
Mission because when it comes to labor trafficking, Vietnam has gotten worse. The number of individuals who are being sold abroad for their labor, with the government doing nothing to stop it and being, I would suggest, complicit in these crimes. As Dr. Tong says, I really believe as well that they ought to be on Tier 3 and subject to sanctioning. And there are a number of sanctions in the law, a number of penalties that can be imposed by the law, and it's a two-step process. The first step is to honestly evaluate the record and then speak truth to power. Talk to these governments by way of the monologues for each government and say how well are they, poorly are they doing. And the second phase that follows several months later is the sanctioning phase. Our hope is that when a government is put on Tier 3, egregious violator, that they will then have a time to get it fixed, to make whole. Some of our best allies in the world, including Israel and South Korea, were on the Tier 3, and during the review period worked overtime to prosecute, to pass new laws, and they got off the Tier 3 designation. And that includes Greece and Turkey as well. And Israel, probably one of America's closest allies, in a very troubled part of the world. They were on Tier 3. They got off of it by taking positive, constructive action. So Vietnam ought to be on Tier 3 based on the record. Let me also say, and I'm making this appeal to the State Department right now, this book, which comes out every year, the annual review, they can do, and we wrote this right into the law, anytime information is brought to bear or brought forward showing that they missed something, whether it be pro or con. If a country is on Tier 3 and positive things happen, the State Department has the capability and the authority by statute to take them off Tier 3. In like manner, if they're on Tier 2 or on a watch list and evidence is brought forward showing in a demonstrable way that they have missed it, which they've missed it in this year's report, the State Department tomorrow can issue a new report. And that's what I'm calling on the State Department to do right now, and the Trafficking Office. Issue a new report on Vietnam specifically.